Okay, so it's Wednesday, February 16th, 10:19 a.m., Senate Natural Resources and Energy, and we are resuming morning testimony on Bill S-234 and more broadly Act 250. We've had some testimony this morning. We have a number of colleagues here from the ANR and the NRB. So at this point, I think it's probably worth pausing, and because we are trying to move ourselves towards a vote and decision on the open items, it would be good to do an accounting with our colleagues to see where we stand with the provisions under discussion, so we'll know what the consequences of our choices are. So I see Deputy Secretary Gendron on the screen, so I'm guessing that means you're self-nominating to speak.
Why not?
You're not?
I said, why not?
Why not? Okay. Great. So could you, I don't know if you want to work from a list. I sent committee members a list last night of open items. I could read an item and then just check in with you, or how would you like to proceed? But I'm just trying to do it somewhat checklist style, so that we're clear with each other where we are.
Sure. I think I would appreciate if Sabina could also come on camera and off mic as well. For the record, my name is Maggie Gendron, Deputy Secretary of the Agency of Natural Resources. And I just want to premise this conversation to just be very clear that our position is not going to change much from last week.
Okay.
In terms of the Agency of Natural Resources, lack of a real comprehensive approach to modernizing Act 250, it's really hard to expand criteria and not look at all of the other pieces that need to go with that, including governance. And so, this is a really hard conversation to have and be able to support it moving forward. And so I just want to make that clear so that there's not, while we might say that we support certain provisions within this particular piece of legislation, as at the agency, it's a hard conversation for us.
Okay, well, that's fine. We're all here trying to.
The complexity is not lost. Yes, the complexity of this conversation is certainly not lost, I think, on anybody who's listening to your committee conversation around this.
Sure. And Chair Haskell, thanks for joining us as well. I don't know if you want to say anything at the outset before we get to sort of again, I understand that the entire bill has to work, but it can be helpful if we're able to navigate to something that is agreeable all the way around. It will be helpful to just walk through some of the various provisions, because even by my count, there's roughly 13 items in the bill at the moment. And so I think it'd be helpful for us to know how important they are, et cetera. So would you like to?
I would echo, thank you, Chairman Bray and committee members. For the record, I am Sabina Haskell, the chair of the NRB. I would echo Deputy Secretary Gendron's remarks that I won't have much difference to add to my testimony last Friday. The governor is focused on ARPA-funded projects, focused on the housing crisis and what we can do to help that. And comprehensive reform is, this is not a comprehensive bill, so we want to stay focused on housing, et cetera, as a priority. And we also mentioned last week that the road rule is basically a non-starter for us.
Okay. So I maybe would it be helpful if I read through the list I put together? I think it's similar to a working list we had with you 10 days ago or something like that. But So there's sections in the bill to enhance, municipal laws and permits. I'd say they are some of the
Sorry,
things.
Mr. Chair.
511. Yeah, Senator
I'm sorry.
Campion, please.
If I may, I very much appreciate the straightforwardness of both Ms. Gendron and Ms. Haskell. So, but if there's no other, if they're not having, I'm not sure what you're about to do, to go through the entire bill with them, even though they've just said, and I'm just looking for clarification, their position isn't changing, nor is there anything else that they want to raise. I may be confused.
Yeah. Well, no, I don't think you're confused.
Okay.
I'm just kind of reviewing the lay of the land, I mean, I get blankets.
I don't want them to have to, go. I think they've seen it. I'm just trying to get a sense of.
Right.
The message I just received was it's kind of not, you could rewind last time they were in here, their testimony. I just thinking of the committee's time and other, just that's where I'm maybe I was confused.
Yeah.
Yeah, I respectfully, Mr. Chairman, I would mimic what Senator Campion is trying to say. I just don't believe that going through the provisions as they are, whether we support them individually or not, at the end of the day, the bill in totality is not one that the governor will be able to support. And so I just don't think we're going to get there in this conversation. I say that respectfully, knowing that your positions and where you want to bring the committee is different than where the governor is focused right now.
Right. All right, I think I would just like to ask for one clarification on the ARPA. Oh, sorry, Senator McDonald, please.
I appreciate the straightforwardness of the witnesses. I'm trying to understand why we're sitting here making a bunch of financial help to stimulate housing, and we keep giving away the number of years that this affordable housing will remain affordable. If you were going to build the housing for people that moderate incomes, and they can be evicted before their kids even graduate from high school because it's such a short duration. I don't know why I'm pursuing this bill either. That's just me. So.
Okay.
Wherever you lead us, we will be following in the next hour or so, Mr. Chair.
All right. Well, let me just a couple quick points. So thank you. I don't want to belabor anything. There was a proposal from the administration about ARPA funded projects, and projects receiving ARPA funding, might they receive treatment similar to priority housing projects? The question I have is, can you define the scope of those projects? Are we talking about housing, commercial development, industrial development, infrastructure development? Like how expansive is the scope of that request to treat them in that way?
The language that, and I just want to say before I start talking that with me today is Associate General Counsel Allison Stone, who can get into a little bit more of the legalities of that language. But the purpose of drafting the language was to provide an avenue for ARPA projects to be having can move more quickly, that we spend the money. I am not aware of what has been approved yet for ARPA projects. And so I, in terms of the legalities of the language, I would ask Allison if she would like to weigh in on that, or do you have a more specific question?
Well, one way to focus it might be to say, if we were just talking about ARPA funded housing, then it makes it much more like the priority housing projects that are already previously under discussion. If it kind of opens the entire field of development, then I think it becomes a more challenging thing to anticipate what would we be actually approving of. And the thing that goes hand in hand with that is, if we were to be talking about housing, Are we also, is the request limited to ARPA funded housing in designated areas? Or, so those are the two parameters around how big the impact could be. I think, if we are to consider doing more development outside of Act 250, and we're not in an area, we're not in a town that's sort of forward thinking enough on planning that they develop the designated area, then we may be sending projects out into places where we might not see as thorough a review as we would like, and we might have some outcomes that were less than what we would hope for.
Yep. And the language is meant to focus on designated areas, to your point.
Okay.
Yep. And I don't know whether Allison wants to weigh in yet or not.
Or
Please.
I can just add, I mean, the language that was proposed is not limited to housing specifically. It defines an ARPA funded project as any development project funded in part by funds from the American Rescue Plan Act. And, but they do need to be located in certain state designated areas. It creates a new ARPA development zone definition, which sets out what those areas are, including downtown development districts, village centers, neighborhood development areas, and existing industrial parks.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. And so that would be, I guess no one can say for sure what all the projects that will be submitted by individuals will be for ARPA funding, but the scope of what you would like to have the bill apply, this provision apply to, is for everything as opposed to housing only. Did I have that right? Okay.
Yes.
That was just one thing I wanted to get squared away on, and I think that's really that was one. The other provision, you heard some discussion around the notwithstanding language, and the notion that it's only at the Act 250 issuance stage that all the mature permits, relevant permits, are brought forward and examined in their totality, and therefore you'd have the opportunity to see the overall impact of a project. And I suppose the existence of projects that have won, the denial of an Act 250 permit to projects that have won all their non-Act 250 permits indicates that the whole can be greater than the sum of the parts, and the commission can end up saying no in the end, or maybe they issue with conditions. So I think we're trying to understand better if we're really changing the nature of those permits to being non-rebuttable presumptions, because once they come in, they're not reevaluated, they're not subject to another review process. So I see Mr. Coster's here. That's usually anyone who flips on their screen. That's the hint to the presiding officer that someone has something to chip in. So Mr. Coster, do you want to, or Ms. Haskell, either of you want to speak to that point?
I defer to the interview, sir.
Okay, we both talked at the same time. My apologies. I was going to defer to Allison to talk about the notwithstanding language as it refers to the NRB, and then perhaps we can get into a little bit of a conversation about how it would interact with A&R permits.
Okay, great, thank you. Ms. Stone.
Sure. So I can talk through the technical aspects of how this might work. I guess I'm not entirely sure what would be the most helpful in terms of if there's a specific ask or a specific question, if you could clarify with them.
Turn it into a more specific question by an instance. So say the permit is issued, so it has to be a minor in order to be eligible. But I've seen that a lot of that, thank you for the data that you gave the committee. It shows that a lot of housing projects actually go through as minors, which was a bit of a surprise to me, honestly. I thought things that were that sizable were by nature majors. At any rate, I think you heard Mr. Weiss's testimony, and we've had conversations with our own counsel, Ms. Chakowski, about it, that it changes the nature of what happens because the permit's only contingent upon receiving a permit, as opposed to evaluating the project as a whole now with all the permits in hand. And if it stays a minor, is there any opportunity for public notice, discussion, etc.? It's my understanding that if it stays a minor, there won't be the public notice and comment sort of process.
I think if there's a notice issued as a minor, then there is a period for the public to comment and to request a hearing. So if there were concerns, it could move into more of a major project review track.
Okay. But if the permits that might actually cause someone to have a concern haven't been issued yet, then they can't be evaluated. So is it possible that someone would lose their right to ask for review, participate in a comment, because the window in which you have to make that request that would push it to a major will have opened and closed while the permits are still being developed outside, either at the municipal level, regional level, A&R level. Now the permits arrived, but the opportunity to request that kind of review is now lost to potential abutters, for instance.
I mean, certainly you wouldn't have a chance to comment in that initial Act 250 proceeding on the scope on what's stated in that permit if it hasn't been issued yet. I would defer to Billy on sort of opportunities for public comment in the in ancillary permitting proceedings for A&R permits. But the way the notwithstanding provision is drafted, if there's an opportunity for if the ancillary, I'm getting some pings in the background. If the ancillary permit would result in a substantial change to the permitted project, then that would require an amendment in the Act 250 permit to the Act 250 permit. So there would be a chance to come back and look at that, to raise that the permit changed the project so substantially that or materially rather that it requires an amendment to what was approved in Act 250.
Okay. Do permits that come in from any of the outside sources, municipal, A&R, et cetera, ever result in substantial changes to the permit?
I think probably yes. I mean, typically now they're taken into consideration. They're taken into consideration when the initial findings are made. So yes, in the permitting process, that can result in a change to a project proposal.
So then again, I think I don't know the process well enough, so forgive me if I'm asking simple questions on this. I'm just wondering if someone who's watching a project has potential concerns won't know the Act 250 permit will be issued, and now these other permits file in after that issuance. How will they then evaluate the project? How do they have an opportunity as a citizen or a neighbor or butter to say, okay, now I can finally see what the whole project's all about, and I either am concerned about permit Z, or in totality, now I feel like this is a substantial change. Who judges whether or not a substantial change has been made, and therefore it's elevated to major permit review status?
Well, I mean, initially, I guess I would say that the commission makes the decision about how to process the application. If they have concerns about, they decide whether to process it. They can decide whether to process it as a major or a minor. And that's before, before they necessarily have the input from all of the parties. They can independently assess whether, what track they think it needs to go on. And then, but then I suppose if a neighbor or other interested person had a concern later under this framework, they would need to be kind of monitoring the ancillary permit proceeding and raise the issue later. I mean, I guess I was looking at some, because this is a model that's followed in the Public Utility Commission process. I looked at a couple of CPGs that were issued, and they've included different language, but some of them require filing the ancillary, the collateral permits with the Public Utility Commission. So in this case, with the District Commission, they would be filed with the commission, and unless there was a determination that there was a material change, there would be no further process.
Right. So thank you. I mean, it's always helpful to know of another model to see how it works. My understanding, which I would need more testimony on to really understand more thoroughly, is that the PUC model, although somewhat analogous, has a different level of review in the end. That the PUC doesn't have that sort of supervisory authority, so they're not necessarily responsible for looking at the project in its totality, but more narrowly to just ascertain that you can't proceed until you've got all your other permits, but they're not necessarily reviewing the other permits. Maybe I misunderstand the difference between the two proposals.
I mean, I do think, I mean, the PUC does have, they do have to make affirmative findings on things such as impact to the natural environment, which incorporates by reference the Act 250 criteria. So they do, I mean, they do have supervisory authority and an obligation to make affirmative findings under the law. And they also have I guess I'm not entirely sure what's being referenced in terms of this overarching look at the project. I mean, the PUC looks at the public good at the end. They also look at the public good in addition to each of the criteria. There's not an equivalent to that for Act 250. I think with some of the supervisory authority, there's a reference to, maybe this is coming from the Hawk Mountain case, but I'm not entirely sure what that piece of is referring to. Billy, are you just coming off of mute?
Yeah, Billy Coster, Agency of Natural Resources. If you don't mind,
Please.
Stone, if I can add a little perspective. So I think it's important to note that all this language does is give district commissions the option to allow collateral permits to come in after the issuance of an Act 250 permit. It doesn't require it. It leaves that discretion with the district commission. It says they may do this. They retain their full supervisory discretion over projects. In reality, there's a lot of Act 250 projects that rely on DEC permits where no one ever seems to give those permits any consideration. It's straightforward. They're issued general stormwater permits, state wetlands permits. They're not things that raise concerns by commissions or parties. If issues regulated under those collateral permits do raise concerns, a commission can either choose not to take this approach and hold the Act 250 permit until those collateral permits come in, or they can elevate it to a major, and then this whole thing is not available to them. So I think this is a very small change that just provides a little bit of procedural flexibility to district commissions to move projects through the system more efficiently. And that's all this is. Okay. So, yeah, I'll just kind of leave it at that. And, I'm not sure what data Mr. Weiss was relying on. It's been our experience that the Act 250 process often does pause and wait for the issuance of some of these collateral permits before they issue an Act 250 permit, and that can add days, weeks, months onto the process. So it's not a majority of cases, but it's certainly something that does happen. And again, this is a small provision to allow some flexibility in those cases if a district commission deems it's appropriate.
Okay. And in terms of the public's right of participation, is the public in this proposed scheme of issuing a permit contingent upon receiving collateral permits, and it stays a minor, is there an opportunity for the public to say, now we've seen the last of the permits, and we want to raise concerns, or are they basically not allowed to do that because it's a minor, and therefore there isn't that sort of comment period that would let them participate in a discussion about the design of the project?
I'd be interested in Allison's thought, but my sense is that there's a number of opportunities for members of the public to raise that concern. First, when a project is noticed as a minor, if they feel like there may be issues related to stormwater, wetlands, water supply, they could flag that and request a hearing and elevate the project to a major. The second option is in their comments in a minor proceeding, they could request that the district commission not issue the land use permit until they've reviewed the subsequent collateral permits, and have some opportunity to kind of weigh in on those permits, after they come into Act 250. So I think those are two ways where if an abutter, a member of the public, was truly concerned about the issues that may be addressed through those collateral permits, they could put a marker down at that time and say, hey, we want full process on these things before the Act 250 District Commission. If no one has those concerns, then the District Commission may choose to avail themselves of this allowance.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Ms. Stone, something more on that point?
I don't know. I was just giving some thought to, I think they would probably have to raise it at the outset. I was just thinking about like party status and the implications that could have if they didn't seek party status on a particular criterion, and then subsequently wanted to challenge the issuance of a collateral permit that related to that criterion. But just
I'm grabbing my trusty Act 250 handbook here. So this will be the third time I've shared, but I keep reading less of it. The thing so this committee has a role around protecting and using Act 250, helping it to evolve, helping it to be useful, and but there's also we don't want to just waive too many provisions and lose what we have. So I'll read from Douglas Costell's opening forward just a little bit, and that is, while some would argue that there's a faster way to run a permit process, few would say there's necessarily a better way. Any sluggishness in the process is outweighed by the benefits of having lay people make decisions within a decentralized system. Like democracy itself, the process often appears inefficient, but how many of us would be willing to trade it in for something else? Obviously, some people. In addition, the scope of issues which fall within Act 250 jurisdiction is broad. Act 250 goes beyond just looking at technical issues. It also looks at such difficult to define areas as aesthetics and how well a project conforms to local or regional plans. All projects alter the environment in some way. Act 250 is forced to decide just how much is too much. And I think that last bit, how much is too much, I think is very hard to see till you look at a project in its totality. And I think that's, I sense where there's, for me, just for me, where we become uneasy that we're giving away the ability to look at something in its totality. So
I guess all I would say to that, Senator, is that the discretion still is lays with the lay district commissions. They're making the decision as to whether they've gotten the full picture and whether they can move on or whether they can't. And again, it's a small change. So, you know, I appreciate if it creates unease, then, you know, it may not be warranted, but I don't think this is a fundamental shift in the Act 250 process, given that the district commissions still decide if this is a tool they can use.
Right. Okay. Well, I don't want to belabor it, and I thank everyone for revisiting the issue, but I just wanted to have a chance to better understand the proposal itself, you know, the language itself, and the scope.
Mr. Chair?
Of the application. Senator McDonald.
Perhaps the last witness didn't intend to sound as dismissive of Mr. Weiss's testimony than it appeared when we heard it. But Mr. Weiss gave some specific details on permits, the timeliness of their issuance, and the ability of the citizenry to take a look at them under the proposed changes. And I frankly listened to what he had to say, and I haven't heard a rebuttal to Mr. Weiss's specific remarks and questions. And to say, well, this is just a minor matter, and the district commissions, gives them some flexibility. I have not heard Mr. Weiss's testimony rebutted. And if he is wrong, then perhaps we can learn how Mr. Weiss was wrong in his testimony about how permits get lost or quickly reviewed or become unreviewable in the process. Apparently, one of the goals of this is to move things along more quickly, and we've been offered a remedy in the last several minutes of, well, if people would just go on the record to question the permit a little sooner, then they would be able to review it. Well, if the remedy is objecting to more things sooner, that perhaps hasn't moved things along more quickly. So I have not heard an answer to Mr. Weiss's concerns, other than it's a small matter and we shouldn't worry about it too much. Those were my words, not the witnesses. It's a small matter. We shouldn't worry about it too much.
Senator McDonald, I will take that opportunity and provide some feedback for you and for the committee.
Thank you. Mr. Weiss takes a long time to speak, but he usually doesn't ramble. So thank you.
And if I may, since I think I'm the witness you're referring to, Senator, I meant no disrespect or dismissiveness of Mr. Weiss' testimony. I thought it was very comprehensive and helpful. My point was that the way that time is tracked often in the way state reports permitting doesn't always account for pauses in the process. So an agency could report that it took them 30 days to issue a permit, but in real time, that could have taken 4 months because there were certain pauses to that clock while information was being waited on from the applicant. So he may have been looking at real time or reported time. I just don't know the answer to that. And my overarching point was that since this is a tool that rests with the district commissions, they still retain all the supervisory, authority that they have now. It just gives them flexibility of how to exert that supervision.
And Ms. Haskell, you'll be taking a look at that. So.
Okay. Thank you. So, yeah, I mean, I think looking at the data will be helpful. I don't think it hinders all of us in having a useful conversation if we hear about lengthy development times or development timelines being pushed out, but we don't, it's hard to track exactly what did that, like I haven't been through one of these application processes, so I don't really know. All I know from previous project management things is we had many lines of work going on in parallel. And you would know how long a process was going to take, and you would try to make sure all your contingencies lined up so that you could make as much progress as possible without delays. Yeah, but there was always a critical path, and you'd keep your eye on that. So I don't know why our accounting is going so this sort of disjointed. Mr. Weiss is still with us. Do you want to offer some additional information, Mr. Weiss?
Yes, I would. Thank you. To respond to Mr. Koster's comment, I developed my analysis. I went to the NRB database and I looked at all of the minor projects that had been on a handout provided on housing provided by NRB chair. And I looked at the date that the Act 250 permit was issued. And then I looked at all the items on the exhibit list and chose the one that was the last one that was on the exhibit list. And over half of those were A&R permits, mix of municipal and V-Trans, and some applicant documents were the rest. And I took the difference between when the last permit was issued and when the last non-Act 250 permit or document was submitted, I should say, and when the Act 250 permit was issued. And that's how I came up with my times. So I was trying to, yes, Act 250 usually includes from the time the permit application was received or deemed complete, and then when the permit was issued. But my method included all the time. It didn't consider the time that, I'm trying to get this straight, the time that Act 250 was on pause waiting for other permits should not be considered a delay in Act 250. It should be an issue with something happening with the other permits. And the timing of the other permits depends on decisions that the applicant makes as to when to apply for the permits, the order to apply for permits, and then how long the permitting process takes. So I'm not saying that it's always a permit issuing problem. Other permits take time too. But Act 250 does run in parallel, and the Act 250 permits are issued very shortly after the last permit is received by the district commission, the last other permit. Don't know if there were any other things you wanted me to comment on or would like some thoughts on. That's the one that stood out that
Okay, well, if I may.
I wanted to respond to.
Mr. Weiss, let me check my numbers with you from my notes while you were speaking. You reviewed 48 minor projects. 20 of those had permit, an Act 250 permit that issued after the median time for issuance of an Act 250 permit following the last collateral permit coming in. The median time of issuance was 6 days after the last collateral permit, and the longest was 34. Did I catch your testimony correctly?
That is correct. And on another issue, the median time for issuing a minor permit is 60 days. And so I looked at the project where the decision took more than 60 days to be issued. That's why my analysis is on 20 permits. Because they took longer than the median 60 days. So I wanted to see whether Act 250 might have caused that extra time or whether it was Act 250 waiting for other permits. And the waiting for other permits time shows that it was waiting for other permits rather than something going on internally in Act 250.
Okay, thank you. So whether it's 6 days after last collateral permit or 34 days, that's why it's hard for me to understand how it is that Act 250 is so often characterized as adding a lot of time to project development. I can't square those numbers. I don't know if anyone else can disambiguate this, to use a word.
I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, sir, but I think Mr. Weiss made the point exactly. It's not the time between when those permits come into Act 250 and the Act 250 permit is issued. It's the time Act 250 has to wait for those permits to come in. And that's the delay we're trying to resolve with this language.
Okay. And what's the consequence of not having the permit? Because you can't commence construction until you have all your permits. So what is the real world impact of getting an Act 250 permit that's still actually waiting for the collaterals to finish coming in? I don't know what I'm failing to understand the benefit. I guess that's all.
It was meant to help focus on where the holdups are. I mean, where you're on different tracks and people can understand where, if it's A&R, if it's the municipality, if it's AOT, if it's Act 250, it was meant for that reason.
Okay.
And then also, I didn't mean to interrupt you, Senator McDonald.
Oh, no, go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Okay. And also there are oftentimes, not oftentimes, but enough times where there are applicant delays because they aren't complete. They haven't provided certain information that is needed. So there's a variety of reasons.
Yeah.
And that one would, that is aside from the notwithstanding, obviously, because we don't deem it complete until we have received the information that we require.
Yep. Okay. Thank you. Senator McDowell?
Thank you very much for the last remarks, Ms. Haskell. We've just had a situation where some permits take 6 days to provide the permit, and then things move on, and then in another case it took 34 days. And generally acknowledged that's not, Act 250 didn't cause that delay. That was the time that it took to get the permits. And so how does the bill that we have before us correct that 30-day gap? That would be a way to speed up. Act 250 is to correct the 30-day delay that wasn't caused by Act 250. But what's the recommendation in the proposal from the administration to close that gap, other than saying that, well, it takes 34 days, we got to find a way to approve it before the 34 days and just skip over that? What's the suggestion on how to speed things up in that case?
I'm going to say something that I'm not sure is directly answering your question, but if there's the ability to see where the holdup is, it might spur faster, more timely action by the folks who have to do the other part of the permitting.
Mr. Chair, I think we would all agree that that's the logical thing to do. Find out where the holdup is and go after and tackle the holdup. Do not to simply speed up Act 250 and say, well, we're not going to wait. We're going to go ahead and issue the permit and speed it up because we haven't taken the time to go on back and find out and deal with the real problem. That's not the way we do things that just isn't the way we do things, is it?
I can think of one thing in your proposal that might address the difference between 6 days and 34, and that is the tracking of ARPA funded projects into their own lane and adding staff. That piece seems like it might shave some time off, but wouldn't speak to the time periods that seem to be driving the longer lines, namely the acquisition of all the collateral permits, which is really out of your control. Okay. All right. Well, nothing like holding onto a porcupine for a few hours. Let's see. Are there any other committee questions or things that people? I mean, thank you all for being here and wrestling with this. It's very helpful to try to sort it out.
Well, we all have quills in our hands on this.
Yeah.
So it's not just one group.
While we're, I sense that we're sort of set on testimony. We don't at the moment. So if anyone doesn't have anything that they want to say, I would like to, our last witness of the morning is Mr. Shoup, hear from Mr. Shoup, and then I think we can wrap up after that. So, but I don't want to cut anyone off. So Chair Haskell, Ms. Stone, Mr. Coster, Deputy Secretary Gendron, anything more before we hear from Mr. Shoup?
Nothing more for me. I thank the committee for their time. Is it okay if I dismiss myself to attend another meeting? Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so Mr. Shoup, good morning.
Thank you.
I don't know if you have any quills yet, so we're inviting you into the room.
No, I have kept my hands clean so far this morning, free of quills. Brian Shoup with the Vermont Natural Resource Council, and I will be brief. We've testified extensively on many of the provisions of the bill. I do want to reiterate a couple of things. We've spoken quite a bit about how the road rule is intended to address forest fragmentation, forest health, and the protection of wildlife habitat. My testimony was very consistent with the testimony of Ben Rose this morning. Other benefits of the road rule include protecting water quality, climate resilience, public safety. If you look around the state, as I've said, most road construction is private roads, and nearly all driveway construction are private driveways. They're minimally regulated. They are in some communities, they're not in many communities, and it does have significant natural resource impacts. I also want to express a little bit of a frustration. I've been involved in these Act 250 stakeholder meetings and committee discussions, I think since I had dark brown hair and I was clean shaven. And I think that my appearance might be the result of Act 250, if anything. And we have long tried to reach compromises with the administration, and we've had some success. And it's very frustrating that their position today is only comprehensive overhaul of Act 250, except for their exemptions and their provisions to weaken the law, that those are acceptable without a comprehensive or a balanced approach, where we've sought a balanced approach that addresses a lot of concerns. I also want to say that the same forces that are driving the housing crisis are driving our natural resource crisis. And we have a high-end development in the state that's driving up our housing market, but also is impacting a whole host of natural resources. And it's very disappointing to me that in all the discussions from the Natural Resources Board, it's been about expediting development or streamlining the process for development without any consideration given to how are we going to protect our natural resources and how are we going to fill the gaps in Act 250 that exist now that aren't protecting our natural resources. So I don't know where this is going, to be honest with you. It is frustrating that we're at a position where the administration only wants exemptions, but doesn't want to kind of roll up their sleeves and figure out how we can address some of the other issues that are affecting the state now. The Vermont Natural Resources Council does recognize that we have a housing crisis in the state, and we'd like to address that, but we'd like to do it in a way that addresses the other challenges that we're facing. And we feel as though just doing that through exemptions and streamlining the process isn't adequate. It's not going to do the job. So I've already testified. We've already testified. I apologize for the rant, but I did want to just express where we are at this moment, given the testimony from the administration.
Thank you, Mr. Shoup. Any committee questions for Mr. Shoup, observations? I know you all you've shared data with us in the past. VNRC has done analysis on permits, et cetera. Somehow frankly, the road rule as a trigger in terms of being over the top request puzzles me a little bit, because I don't have the data, but I think between all of us, we spend a lot of time traveling around. I don't know how often, how many 2,000-foot road driveway / roads go in every year. Mr. Fidel had shared that one of the most corrosive parts to driving forest fragmentation is developments of, I think, 2 to 3 houses at a whack. And it doesn't say anything about driveway length, but so I'm not sure, honestly, what the objection to a road drive that's 4/10 of a mile long, which I'm thinking is a relatively rare thing, but I don't know if you have any data to say anything about frequency of occurrence of these such drives.
I don't have data. I do have a fair amount of anecdotal background. Just if the committee is not aware, prior to working with Vermont Natural Resources Council, I spent probably 2 decades as a community planner, and that included being the executive director of the Mad River Valley Planning District and the director of planning and zoning in the town of Stowe, and then working as a planning consultant in about 50 towns around the state. Working in resort towns, I have seen those long driveways, and I have seen what the impacts of them can be. They're not common, but they do happen when you have the amount of money that's coming into the state. It has been coming into some of our resort communities for years. I also don't understand the opposition, because we had a road rule for, I believe, 20 years. It was not difficult to administer. It was flawed because there were loopholes that were used, and I think this version of the rule in this bill addresses those flaws. I maintain, and this is again not based on data analysis, but based on experience, that you will likely see more avoidance than you will permitting based on the road rule, because you don't have to build a 2,000-foot driveway. You can build shorter driveways. You can keep your development more tightly or compactly designed. And I think that would be the most likely outcome of it. But there would be instances where somebody wants that, house on the top of the mountain, and they're going to pay whatever they can to get it. I've seen that in Stowe. And I think that Act 250 would not be a burden for that landowner to go through to make sure that that development happens in a way that minimizes environmental impacts. But again, I am not speaking. I can't begin to explain the position of the administration. So,
sure, of course. Okay. So thank you. Any questions, comments, committee, for Mr. Shoup? All right. So I would say by now we've heard from all the parties, really, and plenty of testimony. I mean, of course, we could go on and take additional testimony to dig into some details here and there, but the overall lay of the land, I think, has been pretty well explored by us. And I think one way for us as a committee to walk through decision points would be to look at an outline of the bill that Ms. Jakowski prepared in response to Senator Westman's request for a section by section. Mr. Shoup, to be.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I just one further thought, if I could. I apologize for signing off and signing back on. Earlier in this discussion, Mr. Chair, you had mentioned that the possibility of tying the priority housing projects to the funding deadlines for ARPA and sunsetting that process. Right. Now, one suggestion I would have is doing the same with the road rule and using that opportunity as a time to explore whether other jurisdictional triggers are more appropriate. I would just throw that out there as a consideration for the committee. And I also just wanted to make sure I neglected to do this. I wanted to thank the committee for your time and for all of your work on this. It's very much appreciated. It's never easy. updating Act 250 and dealing with some of the challenges we're facing. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I get, so there's, if we were doing something to support housing in designated areas, and that was going to be sunsetted, sort of we wrapped the ARPA funding period with a sunset. You're proposing that we could do the very same thing with the road rule, which would give us roughly four years of data to examine by then. Okay. Jude, can you make me a co-host if I'm not already a co-host?
You are a co-host.
Okay, so I'm going to see if I can share my screen. Other people are way more talented at this. Let's see. Having a little trouble finding what we need. Just a moment. All right. There is experiencing a little in the way of, I'm gonna try that again. All right. So are people seeing a document that says,
Yes, I see it.
NRE strike all amendment summary?
Yes.
So I don't usually do this. I can't, I see you and I see my document. I can't see what you see. All right, so anyway, and how is the size? Do I need to make it bigger, smaller, any of that stuff?
It's good.
Okay, great. All right, so let's walk through this and just sort of straw poll our way along. Oops, didn't mean to do that. And see what things the committee would like to keep in the bill. And what things anyone would like perhaps to jettison or something that we want to add. So I'll just go along. So here we have the section 1, language related to
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I'm getting agitated that we are going ahead and maybe knocking things off here or putting them back in after what we have heard this morning.
Yeah.
And this is not a normal day when we have been told that the administration isn't going to support a balanced presentation. And I find that's something I want to sleep on. And secondly, I am just astounded that we are continuing to review the parts of the bill that are supportive or peripheral to the affordable housing thing when we haven't put up a barricade at the 15 years that's being demanded to be affordable for only 15 years. I mean, this is a lot of money that's being made available and we're giving away. We are actually contemplating spending this money to build housing that people can be evicted from before their kids finish school. this is nuts. In a time and a place where the well-to-do and the working folks are being driven farther and farther apart from one another, we're going to a solution about affordable housing, and we're making it practically a transitory experience. I'm still recovering from this sort of headlong rush that says ignore the details and we'll look into why we can't get a permit out in a timely fashion. But meanwhile, just charge straight ahead. And by the way, this affordability is the Vermont people are getting is transitory.
Okay. Well, so thanks for raising that. That decision was made in 2017 and voted through by the legislature. So we could reconsider.
That was a different money, different program, different time, and the separation between the wealthy and the working families has gotten wider. I'm not beholding in any way, shape, or form to what mistakes that previous legislators and previous governors agreed to. That's
Okay.
Maybe I'll wake up in the morning and be reborn, but not today. Thank you very much.
All right. Well, so here's my point, and process-wise was not to say, oh, we're just going to pretend we didn't hear anything today, but to say, what bill would this committee feel good supporting? That's the, and if we took testimony, but doesn't mean we're yielding to everything we heard. We're thinking for ourselves, but in order to think whether or not, what we would want to move forward, that's what I would like to better understand. And that's 5 of us together agreeing with what this committee would like to see in a bill. So it's not to ignore anything. It's just for the sake of developing a next draft, we would need to know what's in, what's out, and what provisions any section had. Senator McCormick.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I just want to support Senator McDonald's comments. And it seems to me that essentially the administration has walked away from the table. And I've got to say, I've probably said this before, and I apologize, but it's the same situation. So, and that is, if we were to go back to 1970, Act 250 as originally passed was a compromise. It was a meet in the middle moment. And what we have been told for the last 50 years, and we're being told now is, okay, we met in the middle. Now, meet us in the middle, between the middle and where we are. And we've done that many times. And so now we're like 80, 90% away. We've given away most of it already. And I was like, well, just meet us in the middle, compromise. And I got to say that at this point, there was yet another compromise, another Zeno's paradox. Once again, the halfway point has been, we cut it in half, and then we cut that in half, and now the administration is telling us, sorry, it's not good enough. And I've been fine with Act 250 all along. I've been willing to cooperate, willing to work, but it seems to me that we've just basically been kicked in the face, and which is their prerogative, I guess, but we have prerogatives too.
Sure. Well, and to that, so thank you. Well, before we keep going, anyone else? Senator Westman, Senator Campion, we've heard a lot this morning. Clearly there's, we're not even close to something like an agreement at the moment with the administration and on the a bill. So any thoughts about how we might move forward? I mean, one approach that I was starting to go through the section by section for was to say, okay, take everything we've heard, set it aside. As a group now, if we're writing a bill, what would we put in?
Mr. Chair, you mean if we're starting from fresh?
No. With the provisions we have in front of us, we might say, there are 17 provisions. We would want to keep 12 and move that as a bill. All right, so.
Well, I'll answer that. I would want to keep the forest protection. And I would want to delete Act 250 exemptions. And I would like to replace the Act 250 exemptions with an expedited Act 250 process, as described in a bill I've offered that's before the committee.
Okay. Senator Westman, Senator Campion, anything you would, I'm sensing that we are at a place where, as Senator McDonald said, it might be good to sleep on it. But before we sign off, I would like to just have us at least in a productive sort of frame of mind so that the next time we convene on this question, we can make some decisions as a committee.
I'm happy to just say, I think, if I may, Senator McDonald's right. Going through this right now, it doesn't seem to be the most productive way to do it. I think I, for one, do believe that the road rule needs to stay in. Forestry is something we have talked about. I'm talking big picture now. Forestry is something that we have talked about. We've talked an awful lot in the legislature about climate. We know the importance of keeping of the road rule, the negative impacts that are happening right now. So to me, that's just, again, big picture, the kind of direction I would agree with Senator McCormick. Forestry protections are essential. But a lot of what you just presented is, I feel like it's settled science. We've talked about it a lot. So going through the one by one, I think there are a few areas that are controversial that I think you probably have identified, that you're watching the committee, and maybe that's the way to do it. Is what are the 3 or 4 areas that you feel are still unsettled?
Okay. Well, I would say one of the most divisive question has been over the road rule. And I think, as a committee, we have the, of course, doesn't matter. We've heard from many people, and we're going to decide for ourselves what we believe is the most useful thing to move forward. And I think maybe this will be a good moment to check in on the provisions related to the road rule, since that is one of the features that we've heard the most.
Well, I'll be honest. I don't think, this is getting, we know the situation. I don't think we need to hear anything else on what the road rule is about. Unless somebody here is unclear on what it is. I think jumping into the road rule has been done.
I just want to know where each member of the committee is on supporting the bill with the road rule in it.
Well, that's the way to maybe approach the conversation.
Okay.
I don't even want to get to the road rule to give away 15 years of all this opportunity with this money for 15 years. This is unbelievable. We're trying to do affordable housing for people that can't afford it, and what we deliver is less and less housing as we're subsidizing housing that's in part for people of low income that can't find it, and then in many cases we're also subsidizing the construction of pretty nice stuff on the top floors of places. And we're doing this as if this isn't a big step backwards for, we have another bill where we're talking about the overburdened and the underserved. It's 52% of the people, and we're giving those people 15 years of housing with money that's borrowed from either deficit spent or tax dollars. That's it, and then they're out. Why are we doing that? Who's holding our feet to this fire?
All right. Well, any other, so.
I believe we haven't heard from Senator Westman.
There's a lot of frustration here.
Yeah.
I would disagree with the characterization about the road rule. I think it's a difference between the road rule is one thing, having standards to build a road is another. I've got a number of communities that, or a handful of communities that put in road standards. For the life of me, can't understand why we would allow any driveway to be built that isn't built to some standards. We have runoff, and that runoff is being created. So a 2,000 arbitrary number to put the road rule in place doesn't answer people building driveways that don't have proper culverts and don't do that. And that is not directly related to 50. So I'm not the fan of the road rule. I am a fan of communities instituting road standards. Every community I've got is having to rebuild all their roads and their culverts to stop the runoff that in the watersheds in the state. So I'm not sure the road rule is going to accomplish what anybody here would like for runoff. Some of the provisions that have been brought up I could support, but not all of it.
All right. I did speak to Karen Horton of VLCT about towns taking over roads that were private roads and substandard, and not built to the municipal roads general permit standards. And she said that VLCT gets consulted on this question pretty regularly, and their advice is uniform, which is do not accept the private road as a town road because of the expense and difficulties that brings the town.
Well, but it's not only that, that those private roads that get built, regardless if they're 100 feet long or over 2,000 feet long, create runoff.
Okay.
And we are, I thought, working to clean up the watersheds. So why do we have one standard for towns and another standard for somebody building a driveway of 150 feet?
Well, so I'll check in before we're back on this bill again with council and find out where standards are defined. I think they'd be in our Title 24 municipal law planning sections. So
I would expect it would.
And I don't think, my understanding so far has been that Act 250 doesn't consider that aspect of the driveway standards for construction. So, but it could look at for where driveways are placed to avoid sensitive areas, etc. But not road construction. All right. Well, I'm feeling like at this point it will be worth pausing and letting people consider the bill. And I will reach out to people individually to just check in with you and see where you are. And then I think we're going to have to gather up and, fish or cut bait on some things and decide that either there's a bill salvageable out of the material we have in the room, or that there is not. And then if we believe there's a salvageable bill, but it runs contrary to what we've heard from the administration, then that's never stopped any committee from moving forward its best recommendation to our colleagues. And so maybe that's the path we're on.
Mr. Chairman, before we go our separate ways, I want to say that I am very aware of how hard you have worked to get some kind of compromise, and I am one of your problems. There are places I'm not willing to go, but I do not take any pleasure in making your life hard. I can see you're working very, very hard to get some kind of compromise, and I appreciate that.
All right. Well, thanks for that. Just goes with the job. And I'm also cognizant that a compromise can be sort of a polite thing to do, but it's not always the best path for us to take. As much as inclined as I am to try to find one, I don't want to be to a fault compromising when we find that there are things that are more important to us than a compromise.
I think there are models of compromises other than meeting in the middle. The meeting in the middle implies 2 points, and then there's a place. There's also a compromise of, like, you got the 2 points and you draw a circle around both. If you can find some way to honor the imperatives from both positions, which is what I would like to say I'm trying to do with the expedited Act 250 permit as opposed to the exemption. If the committee doesn't agree with me about that, but I see that as a circle around the 2 points. It says, get there quickly, get there cheaply, but do it right.
Right. Well, I appreciate your steadfastness. I think the problem for us with the master permit approach was we didn't have any takers out in the world of towns. So who are really our partners in all this. We're doing a lot of planning on behalf of others here. So, all right. Well, I appreciate everyone's tenacity and good humor in working through something that's not so easy. And I would just say, Senator McDonald has good advice, probably, in the sleep on it thing. My grandmother told me the same thing, don't just sleep on it. Sometimes things clear up overnight, and we'll just give this some time because we heard a lot today.
Sleep on a quilt, not quills.
Yeah.
Go for a walk.
Go for a walk. All right. Speaking of walks, we have a little extra time, so I hope everyone gets one in. With that,